Greetings and welcome to Infodome. Today we are looking at the life of Henry VIII, who was undoubtedly one of the most colourful figures in the history of the English monarchy. Famed for his role in the Reformation and the succession of 6 wives, this is one Tudor monarch who has captured the imagination of many. Henry Tudor was born on the 28th of June 1491 at Greenwich Palace in England. His father was the ruling King Henry VII, the first of the Tudor monarchs. However, Henry was born 3 months after his father's death. As a child, he received an excellent education and learned to speak Latin and French as well as some Italian. Henry was a king who hadn't been expected to rule. He only took the throne because his older brother Arthur had died of a mysterious illness at the tender age of 15. On June 24, 1509, Henry VIII received the crown of England. When Henry ascended to the throne, he seemed to have followed a philosophy of working to live, not living to work. Most mornings he didn't get up until 8 o'clock, making him a late riser for the time. Once he was out of bed, he preferred hunting or hawking over the business of governing a country. When his outdoor activities ended, Henry could find time to meet some of his obligations, but work had to be completed quickly. His nights were usually filled with dancing, gambling, or playing cards. Catherine of Aragon was Henry's first wife and his longest marriage. After his brother died, Henry obtained a papal dispensation to marry Arthur's wife, Catherine, as he had been in love with her for some time. Henry and Catherine married and produced a daughter named Mary. However, his reign progressed. He grew desperate for a son who carried the Tudor dynasty. His undying love proved not to be enough for Henry, because roughly 20 years after wedding Catherine, he sought the Pope's approval for an annulment. He pleaded his case and claimed that since his wife had previously been married to his brother, his marriage was invalid. When the Pope refused, Henry began his own church, the Church of England. Anne Boleyn became Henry's second wife after the pair married secretly in 1533. By this time, Anne was pregnant with her first child to Henry, and by June 1533 she was crowned Queen of England. Despite being named Queen Consort of England and bearing a daughter to Henry, there was soon trouble in paradise. Anne's inability to bear a son, a rightful male heir to the throne, proved to be her downfall. Henry soon lost interest in her, divorced her, and despite very little evidence against her, beheaded her. Henry moved on to one of her ladies-in-waiting, Jane Seymour, marrying her just 10 days after Anne's execution on the 30th of May, 1535. It is widely believed that Henry made her his mistress while married to Anne, and that she was a key player in her predecessor's untimely execution. The pair were married for a little over a year before Jane gave birth to a son, the king's third child and his first male heir. Unfortunately, due to complications with the birth, Jane died 12 days after her son was born. Henry was single for 2 years after Jane Seymour's death, but as time passed, the king and his ministers felt that England needed a foreign ally, and so the hunt for a new bride began. Henry sent a talented painter called Hans Holbein to Germany to paint portraits of the Duke of Cleves' daughters, Anne and Amelia. Anne's portrait pleased him, and arrangements were made for the pair to wed. But Anne's arrival in England proved to be a bit of a disaster, to say the least. Seeing her in person, Henry took an instant dislike to Anne, finding her ugly, referred to her as the Mare of Flanders. Too late to cancel, their wedding took place on the 6th of January 1540, only for the marriage to be annulled a few weeks later. Catherine Howard was the 5th of Henry's wives, and the second to be beheaded. Ironic, as the first to be beheaded, Anne Boleyn, was her first cousin. She was 16 at the time of their marriage in July 1540, while her husband, Henry, was now 49 years old. Though their marriage was a year long, they produced no children, and she was eventually accused of treason for committing adultery while married to Henry. 3 months after being stripped of her title of queen, Henry had Catherine beheaded. The last of Henry VIII's wives was Catherine Parr, the most influential in making sure his lineage continued. Catherine married Henry on the 12th of July 1543. She became the restorer of his court, uniting his children and making sure they were presented to the world as a close-knit family. She was instrumental in his legitimate children's education and passed legislation that made his previously illegitimate children legitimate again. Henry VIII trusted his last wife so much that when he went to war, he appointed her as his successor, naming her Queen Regent in the event of his death. Prior to the Reformation, all of England's inhabitants, including the king, prescribed to Catholicism. In fact, King Henry VIII was such a strong adherent that he was given the title Defender of the Faith by the Pope for his efforts in protecting Catholicism against the Protestants. However, all this changed upon the Pope's denial of Henry's request for a divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. It is believed the Vatican didn't want to anger the King of Spain, who was Catherine's father. Henry and his parliament split from the Roman Catholic Church through the Act of Supremacy, which then placed Henry and all his successors as head of the new Church of England. The most wealthy Catholics in England were the monks. They were also the most loyal supporters of the Pope. This made them a threat to Henry. Henry decided to shut down or dissolve the monasteries of England. The dissolution of the monasteries from 1536 to 1540 led to the closure of all monasteries and convents in England, and the wealth obtained was channeled to other causes like strengthening of England's defences. Though Henry was a healthy young man, he was still paranoid about getting sick and dying. Given the times, there were plenty of illnesses for him to worry about, but two particular concerns were the sweating sickness, which was a common and often deadly ailment, and the plague. During outbreaks, Henry tried to minimise his risk of infection by steering clear of those who might have been exposed to the disease. When a severe wave of the sweating sickness hit in 1517 to 1518, Henry left London for nearly a year. At one point during the outbreak, the king refused to see anyone outside of the household. Precautions against the plague and the sweating sickness helped keep Henry safe from those diseases, but he wasn't able to protect himself entirely against ill health. As he grew older, particularly once he entered middle age, Henry put on a massive amount of weight. Suits of armour showed that his waistline, which had measured 32 inches in 1512, grew to 54 inches. Henry gained nearly 400 pounds when he died in 1547. In his later years, the king also suffered from painful ulcers on his leg and had trouble standing and walking. Henry was a big spender. By his death, on the 28th of January 1547, he had accumulated 50 royal palaces, a record for the English monarchy, and spent vast sums on his collections, including musical instruments and tapestries, and of course gambling. Not to mention the millions he pumped into wars with Scotland and France. When Henry's son Edward VI took the throne, the royal coffers were in a sorry state. Henry was laid to rest at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle next to Jane Seymour, Edward's mother, regarded as many as Henry's favourite wife. In spite of his obsession of producing a male heir, Henry VIII had 4 children, 3 from his marriages and 1 with his mistress, Elizabeth Blount, named Henry Fitzroy. The surname Fitzroy essentially means son of a king. His 3 official children went on to be kings and queens, with his youngest Elizabeth I becoming an iconic monarch in her own right. We hope you enjoyed learning about one of the most famous kings in England's history. Please take a look at some of our other videos to feed your curiosity. Until next time.